You ever see a moment that just smashes your view of the world and puts it back together in a totally different shape? That's what happened that Saturday afternoon at the Whitmore mansion, and let me tell you, if someone had told me the millionaire's disabled daughter was about to drown in front of 40 elite guests, and only the cleaning lady's black son would jump in to save her, I would have said they were watching too many movies. But that's exactly how it started. Tiago Santos, 17, dove into that pool without a second thought, the splash echoing off marble and glass like a shot fired in a silent room. Everyone just froze. There was Isabella, the girl in the chair, sinking slow motion under blue water, her face twisted with panic, while all those guests just clung to their drinks, waiting for someone else to do something. It's wild how fast people can weigh the risk of ruining their shoes against the value of a human life. "Someone do something," some woman screamed, but she never moved an inch. Tiago didn't need an invitation. His mom, Carmen, had scrubbed every inch of that place for years. He'd grown up in those rooms, played in that yard while his mom worked. He knew Isabella, knew she had cerebral palsy and couldn't swim. Her adapted chair had failed, and no one had noticed except him. The whole thing took seconds, but it felt like forever. Tiago dove, kicked hard, got to her, and untangled her from the mess of straps. When he broke the surface, Isabella coughed, gasped for air, clung to his arm. "Thank you," she managed, and for a split second, everyone cheered. But that feeling didn't last, because right then, Richard Whitmore stormed out, the kind of man whose presence just kills the mood in the room. His face was bright red, but not from fear, from anger. Not at himself for failing to protect his daughter. Not at the other guests for doing nothing. Nope. He glared at Tiago and thundered, "What the hell are you doing in the social area? Didn't your mother teach you to stay in your place?" You could feel the air leave the party. Isabella tried to speak up for Tiago, but her father just shut her down with a snap. "You shouldn't be using that defective equipment." Then, turning back to Tiago, he promised, "You'll regret stepping where you don't belong." Now, you'd think a teenager in his position would shrink away, but Tiago just stood there, wet, calm, as if he'd faced worse storms before. And honestly, he had. He'd learned early that men like Richard only saw people like him as trouble, even when saving lives. Yeah, that happened. And that's where things got even uglier. By nightfall, Richard had fired Carmen after 12 years, accusing her of letting her son breach security. He gave them 24 hours to leave the staff quarters and threatened legal action. No gratitude, just cold business. Isabella pleaded with him, but every time she tried, Richard only tightened his grip. First her phone disappeared, then her swimming lessons were banned, then he hired a nurse to watch her day and night. That mansion, once her whole world, became her golden cage. "People like them just want something from us," Richard said, his voice all smooth and fake patient, the way rich people do when they want to seem reasonable. "That boy didn't save you out of kindness." But Isabella remembered Tiago from the old days, him sneaking library books for her, making her laugh, helping her learn to read when therapists gave up. She knew kindness for what it was. Meanwhile, Tiago and Carmen packed up their lives and moved into a cramped rented apartment across town. Carmen was proud, but worried. "Men like Richard can ruin a life with a phone call," she warned. But Tiago, quietly stacking his textbooks, just smiled, that same sly smile his grandfather had, the one that said, "You'll see." He remembered how his granddad built their first house brick by brick in a neighborhood no one thought a black man could ever call home. He didn't build it to prove he was right, Tiago said, but to prove they were wrong. That night, he opened his old beat-up laptop and got to work. Research, he told his mom. But it wasn't schoolwork. Tiago was hunting for something deeper. In the days that followed, he dug through business records, court filings, contracts, anything with Whitmore's name. He saw patterns no one else had bothered to connect. The kitchen table became a command center, glowing with the light of 3 busted laptops running at once. "Son, it's 3 a.m., Carmen murmured, but Tiago barely looked up. 15 more minutes, Mom." Turns out, Richard Whitmore had skeletons packed in every closet, hidden lawsuits, suspicious contracts, a trail of shell companies tangled like weeds. At school, Tiago found an unlikely ally in his civics teacher, Janet Morrison, a former investigative reporter, sharp as a tack. She caught on to what he was doing and didn't shut him down. She joined in, guiding him through the legal landmines. "You have a talent for this," she told him, "but you need a lawyer." That's when Marcus Chun stepped in, a civil rights attorney who'd seen too many people steamrolled by money and power. Together, they built a case, every detail carefully locked away, every insult from Richard another brick in the wall. Meanwhile, Isabella, stuck under constant watch, found her own hero in her nurse. Rosa, a gentle woman who saw through the whole charade and secretly let her use her phone. Isabella called Tiago, whispering secrets. "There's a safe in the basement, behind my grandfather's picture. Dad's always meeting shady people down there." Suddenly, the pieces fit. Tiago and Janet mapped it all out, each thread pulling tighter. Richard, for his part, strutted around thinking he'd won. He hired security to monitor the Santos family, confident that if they tried anything, his money could squash them. But he never noticed the holes in his own security, the remote access he'd set up on his own surveillance system, the digital breadcrumbs he left everywhere. Tiago slipped right in, grabbing audio and video that would make the evening news blush. Sometimes the door you slam on someone else just swings open for them on the other side. Everything came together fast. Monday morning, Richard woke to 53 missed calls, reporters at his company's door, his wife locking herself in the bedroom. The news was out everywhere. Fraud, money laundering, secret tapes, government contracts, threats. His world crumbled in real time. And right there in his inbox, an email, investigateCoto@gmail.com TS. The message was clear: evidence, testimony, recordings. The accounts already frozen. The FBI on the way. He called his lawyer, Harrison Wells, who could barely talk. He was so shaken. "They have you, Richard. All of it. Audio, documents, the works." Richard's hands shook as he read and reread the headlines. The real punchline? The key evidence: that damning conversation had come from Isabella's call to Tiago during her father's threats. Isabella, the one he'd tried to cage, had helped bring the truth to light. Within hours, agents were raiding the mansion. Social services were talking to Isabella about her father's neglect, and every act of cruelty Richard had shown the Santos family became another nail in his own coffin. Tiago, sitting beside his mom in their tiny apartment, watched the story break on national news. Carmen could barely believe it. "How did you pull this off?" she asked, tears in her eyes. Tiago smiled. "You always said education was the one thing no one could take from us." Richard forgot that intelligence has no color. The twist? While Richard was dragged off for questioning, universities from across the country were calling Tiago, offering full scholarships: Harvard, MIT, Stanford. Marcus, the lawyer, brought news that Isabella's guardians wanted Tiago to help with her studies, now that she was free from her father's grip. The boy Richard tried to erase became a symbol for kids everywhere, a kid who fought injustice, not with fists or threats, but with brains and backbone. Months passed. Richard Whitmore's empire was auctioned off, his friends abandoned him, his own wife left before the trial even started. The man who spent his life measuring people by their worth now shared a prison cell with men he'd spent years looking down on, and they treated him with more dignity than he ever showed anyone. Tiago, meanwhile, walked the halls of Harvard, his mother running her own small business back home, both of them finally standing on their own terms. Isabella, adopted into a kind family, became a fierce advocate for disability rights, using her voice to push for change. And Janet Morrison, the teacher who first believed in Tiago, now taught a class on how citizen journalism can topple empires. A few years later, at graduation, Tiago stood in front of thousands and shared the lesson he'd lived. "People like Richard wanted to teach me my place. But your place isn't where others put you. Your place is what you build for yourself, out of everything they said you couldn't have." The crowd roared. Across the country, other kids started to believe it too. And maybe that's the real story. Not just a boy rescuing a girl from a pool, or even bringing down a corrupt empire. It's about proving to yourself, to the world, that no one else decides your value. That the greatest revenge isn't just justice, but living so boldly that the ones who doubted you can only watch as you soar. So, if you think justice only comes for the powerful, or that intelligence can be boxed in by prejudice or money, maybe it's time to look again. Because sometimes the ones you overlook are the ones who will change everything, and the pool you thought would drown someone else ends up drowning your own arrogance instead. Now, let's talk. Do you think what Tiago did was justice, revenge, or something else entirely? Where do you draw the line between right and wrong when the system itself is rigged? Drop your thoughts below, share your own stories because this conversation is just getting started and the world needs to hear your voice.